On January 22nd, 1970, passengers boarded a Pan Am flight from New York to London and stepped into something the world had never seen before. It was not just an airplane, it was a flying building, a machine so large that people did not know how to describe it. It had 2 aisles, 10 seats across, a staircase inside the cabin, a lounge in the sky, 4 massive engines hanging under wings wider than many houses, and a hump on its nose that made it instantly recognizable from miles away. The Boeing 747 had arrived. Before the 747, international air travel was still a privilege. It was faster than ships, but it was expensive, cramped, and limited to those who could afford it. After the 747, everything changed. More people could cross oceans. Airlines could carry hundreds of passengers at once. Airports had to be rebuilt. Tourism exploded. Global business accelerated. Families separated by continents could see each other more easily. The world became smaller. But the story of the 747 does not start at an airport. It does not start in a passenger cabin. It does not start with tourists, pilots, or flight attendants. It starts with a problem. By the early 1960s, the jet age had already transformed aviation. The Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 had made long-distance flying faster than anything before them. A trip that once took days by ocean liner could now take hours by jet. People were amazed. Airlines were thrilled. Passengers felt like they were living in the future. But success created a new crisis. Air travel was growing too fast. Airports were getting crowded. Runways were filling up. Terminals were under pressure. And the aircraft that had once seemed huge were suddenly not big enough. Pan American World Airways, better known as Pan Am, saw this before almost anyone else. Pan Am was not just an airline. It was the symbol of global aviation. Its routes crossed oceans. Its crews wore the image of international glamour. Its founder, Juan Trippe, believed air travel should not remain a luxury for the few. He wanted a bigger airplane, a much bigger airplane, not slightly larger than the 707, not a small improvement. He wanted a jet that could carry more than twice as many passengers and lower the cost of flying across oceans. This seemed almost impossible. Airplanes had always grown slowly, a little longer, a little faster, a little more powerful. But Trippe wanted a leap. He wanted the ocean liner of the sky, and he went to Boeing. At Boeing, the task fell to a quiet engineer named Joe Sutter. Sutter was not supposed to become the father of the 747. He had been working on the 737, a much smaller aircraft designed for short routes. Then Boeing pulled him into the most ambitious commercial airplane project in history. The timeline was insane. The risks were enormous. The airplane was so large that Boeing did not even have a factory big enough to build it, and if it failed, it could take the company down with it. This is the part of the 747's history that most people never think about. The jumbo jet was not born from comfort. It was born from pressure. Pan Am wanted it. Air travel needed it. Boeing gambled everything on it, and the engineers had to make it real. In April 1966, Pan Am placed an order for 25 Boeing 747s. That single order changed aviation history. It gave Boeing the confidence to move forward, but it also locked the company into a dangerous promise. They had to design, build, test, certify, and deliver an airplane larger than anything the passenger world had ever seen. And they had to do it fast. There was another problem. Many people believed the future did not belong to giant subsonic jets. They believed the future belonged to supersonic aircraft. Planes like Concorde were supposed to carry passengers faster than the speed of sound. Some experts thought ordinary long-distance jets would soon become outdated, so Boeing designed the 747 with a strange backup plan. If passengers eventually chose supersonic aircraft, the 747 could become a cargo plane. That is why the cockpit was placed above the main deck. The raised cockpit created the famous hump, but it also allowed the nose of the aircraft to open for freight. The feature that made the 747 iconic began as insurance against failure. Think about that. One of the most recognizable shapes in aviation history came from the fear that the airplane might not survive as a passenger jet. But fear did not stop the project. It shaped it. The 747 had to be enormous. It had to be strong. It had to be safe. It had to be profitable. It had to fly farther than existing jets. It had to carry hundreds of people. And it had to convince passengers that something this massive could actually leave the ground. Boeing's engineers faced problems at every level. The wings had to be huge, but efficient. The landing gear had to support a weight that seemed almost absurd. The cabin had to feel spacious, not terrifying. The engines had to produce more power than previous commercial engines. The airport gates, maintenance systems, and ground equipment all had to adapt. This was not just a new airplane. It was a new aviation ecosystem. And Boeing needed somewhere to build it. So they built a factory. In Everett, Washington, Boeing constructed one of the largest buildings on Earth. It was so huge that clouds were said to form inside before climate systems were installed. Workers poured into the site. Engineers, mechanics, machinists, designers, test pilots, suppliers, managers, and thousands of others joined a race against time. The 747 was not assembled like a normal product. It was more like building a cathedral out of aluminum, wires, engines, hydraulics, and ambition. Every section was massive. The fuselage was enormous. The tail towered over workers. The wings stretched farther than many early airplanes could fly. Inside the factory, people looked tiny next to the machine they were creating. And yet, every rivet mattered. Every wire mattered. Every calculation mattered. Because one mistake on the ground could become a disaster in the sky. By September 1968, the first Boeing 747 was ready to be shown to the world. It rolled out of the Everett factory in front of thousands of employees, airline executives, journalists, and spectators. The aircraft was painted in white and red. It looked impossible. It looked too big to move, too big to fly, too big to belong to the same category as every airplane before it. People stared at it the way people once stared at ocean liners, skyscrapers, and rockets, because the 747 was all three at once: a passenger ship, a building, a machine for shrinking the planet. But rolling out of a factory is not the same as flying. And this is where the risk became real. On February 9th, 1969, the first Boeing 747 took off for the first time. The aircraft lifted from the runway in Washington state and climbed into the air. For a moment, the entire future of Boeing, Pan Am, and mass long-haul air travel seemed to hang beneath its wings. If the 747 failed, it would not be a small failure. It would be a public humiliation, a financial catastrophe, a warning to the entire aviation industry that bigger was not always better. But the airplane flew. The jumbo jet was real, and the world had to adjust. Testing was intense. The engines were new and troublesome. The aircraft had to prove that it could perform safely in normal conditions, emergency conditions, and conditions most passengers would never see. Pilots had to learn how to handle a machine of unprecedented size. Airlines had to train crews. Airports had to prepare. Mechanics had to learn new systems. Passengers had to be convinced. And on January 22nd, 1970. The 747 entered commercial service with Pan Am. The route was New York to London, one of the most important routes in the world. The symbolism was perfect. The old Atlantic crossing had once belonged to ocean liners. Now it belonged to the jumbo jet. For decades, crossing the Atlantic had been a grand journey by sea. It took days. It had dining rooms, cabins, decks, and class divisions. It was romantic, slow, and expensive. The 747 changed the emotional meaning of crossing an ocean. The ocean was no longer something you sailed across. It was something you flew over while eating dinner, watching a movie, and trying to sleep. This seems normal now. It was not normal then. The 747 made distance feel different. New York and London were still thousands of miles apart, but psychologically, they moved closer. That is what revolutionary transportation does. It does not move cities. It changes how humans experience them. The early 747 was glamorous. Airlines used its size to create spaces passengers had never seen before. There were lounges on the upper deck. Some airlines installed piano bars. First-class passengers drank cocktails above the clouds. Flight attendants served meals with the confidence of an age that believed air travel was still magical. The cabin felt wide and open compared to earlier jets. There were 2 aisles instead of 1. Hundreds of passengers could board the same aircraft. The scale was astonishing. A single flight could carry the population of a small village across an ocean. But the real revolution was not the lounge. It was the economics. The 747 spread the cost of long-distance flying across more passengers. That meant airlines could lower the cost per seat. And lower costs meant more people could fly. This is the part that changed the world more than the glamour. The 747 helped turn international travel from an elite experience into a mass experience. Not overnight, not for everyone, but the direction was clear. More seats, lower fares, more routes, more passengers, more airports, more tourism. Before the jumbo jet, flying across the world was something many people dreamed about, but never did. After the jumbo jet, it became something millions could imagine, save for, and eventually experience. The 747 did not just carry passengers. It carried the idea that the world was accessible, and that idea was powerful. By the 1970s, the 747 became the face of international aviation. It appeared on postcards, in movies, in advertisements, at airports, on magazine covers. It became a symbol of modernity. If a city could handle the 747, it was connected to the world. If an airline operated the 747, it looked powerful. If a passenger flew on the 747, they felt part of the future. Airports changed because of it. Terminals needed larger gates. Runways needed strength and length. Baggage systems had to handle hundreds of bags from a single aircraft. Customs halls had to process waves of international passengers. Catering trucks had to lift food to doors high above the ground. Fuel trucks had to feed a machine that drank enormous amounts of jet fuel. The jumbo jet did not simply use airports. It forced airports to evolve. And the world built around it. Tourism exploded in places once considered distant. Hawaii, Europe, Asia, the Caribbean, the Middle East, Australia. The 747 made long-haul package holidays more practical. It helped connect migrant families across continents. It allowed business travelers to cross oceans faster and more often. It carried students, diplomats, athletes, celebrities, refugees, pilgrims, and ordinary vacationers. The jet age had begun before the 747, but the 747 made it massive. It was the airplane of globalization before people used that word every day. Factories could be managed across oceans. Executives could fly to meetings in other continents. Goods, people, and ideas moved faster. Cultures touched more often. Tourism economies grew. The planet did not shrink physically, but commercially, socially, and emotionally, it did. And then there was cargo. The 747 had been partly designed with freight in mind. That decision became one of its greatest strengths. Passenger versions filled the skies. Cargo versions filled global supply chains. The nose could open. Large freight could be loaded. The aircraft could carry goods across oceans at enormous scale. Electronics, machinery, medical supplies, fashion, mail, military equipment, race cars, horses, satellites, humanitarian aid. The 747 did not just change how people traveled, it changed how the world moved things. Before modern air cargo, speed was limited. Ships could carry huge loads, but slowly. Smaller planes could move goods fast, but in limited amounts. The 747 brought scale to air freight, and scale changes everything. Suddenly, time-sensitive cargo could cross the world quickly. Global business learned to depend on speed. Factories could wait for parts from another continent. Retailers could move products faster. Governments could send emergency aid. The 747 became a backbone of the global economy. A passenger icon by day, a cargo workhorse by night. But the 747 story was not just about commerce. It also became a symbol of state power. The United States chose modified 747s to serve as Air Force One. This made sense. The aircraft was large, long-range, recognizable, and imposing. When the presidential 747 landed in another country, it was not just transportation, it was theater, a flying White House, a symbol of American reach, a message made of metal, engines, flags, and distance. The same airplane that carried tourists to London could carry presidents, command systems, and the image of a superpower. That is why the 747 became more than an aircraft type. It became a stage for power. Other governments use 747s too. Royal families, heads of state, military forces, cargo operators, national airlines. The airplane was flexible enough to be many things: luxury carrier, mass transporter, freighter, command aircraft, space shuttle carrier, emergency lifeline. The 747 even carried spacecraft. NASA modified 747s to transport the space shuttle on their backs. The image was almost absurd. A giant aircraft carrying a spacecraft like a mother animal, carrying its young. It was one of the most unforgettable images of the machine age. An airplane built to move people across Earth was now helping move vehicles built for orbit. The 747 belonged to the sky in more than one way. But behind the glory were problems. The jumbo jet was expensive. It needed 4 engines. It consumed enormous amounts of fuel. It required high passenger numbers to make economic sense. When seats were full, it was powerful. When seats were empty, it was costly, and aviation changed. In the 1970s, oil prices rose sharply. Fuel became more expensive. Airlines had to think harder about efficiency. The 747 survived, but the economics became more complicated. Later, twin-engine aircraft became safer, more reliable, and more efficient. New rules allowed twin-engine jets to fly long routes over oceans. Aircraft like the Boeing 777 and later the 787 could fly far with only 2 engines and fewer seats to fill. That changed the logic of air travel. The 747 was built for the hub-and-spoke world, move huge numbers of people between major cities, fill giant aircraft, connect through big airports. But modern aviation increasingly moved toward point-to-point routes. Smaller long-range jets could fly directly between cities that did not need a jumbo jet. Passengers liked direct flights. Airlines liked lower fuel costs. The world that made the 747 necessary began to disappear. This is the cruel part of technology. A machine can change the world so successfully that the world no longer needs it in the same way. The 747 helped create mass global air travel. Then mass global air travel evolved beyond the 747. Still, for decades, the jumbo jet adapted. The 747-200 improved range and capability. The 747-400 became one of the most successful long-haul aircraft ever built. With its extended upper deck, improved engines, modern cockpit, and long range, the 747-400 became the queen of international travel in the late 20th century. It flew across the Pacific, across the Atlantic, across continents. It connected megacities. It carried millions of passengers into the age of global tourism and business. For many people, the first time they crossed an ocean was on a 747. The first time they visited another continent. The first time they moved to a new country. The first time they saw clouds from 35,000 feet while chasing sunrise across a dark ocean. The 747 became part of personal history, not just aviation history. People remembered its staircase, its wide cabin, its 4 engines, its shadow on the runway, its upper deck, its nose rising from the gate like the head of some enormous creature. It felt alive. Airplanes are machines, but some machines become emotional. The 747 was one of them. Pilots loved it. Passengers recognized it. Children pointed at it through terminal windows. Aviation fans called it the Queen of the Skies. That nickname mattered because it captured something technical language could not. The 747 had presence. It did not look like other airplanes. It did not feel like other airplanes. It arrived with authority. But no queen rules forever. By the early 21st century, the passenger 747 was fading. Airlines retired them one by one. Some were sent to deserts. Some were scrapped. Some became cargo aircraft. Some were preserved. Some kept flying for a few airlines that still had routes and demand large enough to justify them. Then came another blow. The COVID-19 pandemic devastated international travel. Airlines grounded fleets. Long-haul demand collapsed. Aircraft that might have flown for years longer were suddenly retired early. For many 747s, the pandemic was the final curtain. Images appeared of jumbo jets parked in rows, their engines covered, their futures uncertain. It felt like watching an era end. And then, in 2023, Boeing delivered the final 747. After more than half a century, production was over. The airplane that had once represented the future had become history. But that does not mean it disappeared. Some 747s still fly cargo. Some still carry passengers in limited service. Some serve governments. Some sit in museums. Some rest in boneyards under desert sun. And some live in memory. The 747's legacy is everywhere. Every wide-body cabin owes something to it. Every mass long-haul route owes something to it. Every global airport built for huge passenger flows owes something to it. Every traveler who thinks crossing an ocean is normal owes something to it. Before the 747, the world was already connected. After the 747, it was connected at scale. That was the difference. Scale. Hundreds of passengers at once. Tons of cargo at once. Continents linked routinely. Air travel made ordinary. The jumbo jet did not invent globalization, but it gave globalization wings. And like every machine that changes the world, its legacy is complicated. The 747 made travel more democratic. It helped families reunite. It expanded tourism. It connected cultures. It moved medicine, goods, and emergency aid. It made the world feel reachable, but it also helped create the age of mass aviation with all its costs: crowded airports, over-tourism, carbon emissions, noise, jet fuel dependency, the transformation of distant places into products for visitors. The same airplane that opened the world also helped accelerate the pressures, now shaping it. That is the contradiction of the 747. It was freedom and consumption, wonder and industry, engineering brilliance and environmental burden, a miracle of human cooperation and a symbol of a world that learned to move constantly. The jumbo jet gave ordinary people access to the sky, but it also made the sky part of the economy. Today, when you walk through a modern airport, you are walking through a world the 747 helped create. The long international terminals, the duty-free shops, the passport lines, the jet bridges, the baggage belts, the departure boards filled with cities on the other side of the planet. The idea that breakfast can be in New York, dinner in London, and tomorrow morning somewhere else entirely. That idea was not always normal. The 747 helped make it normal. A machine designed in a rush, built in a factory that did not exist, powered by engines that had to be invented, and shaped by the fear that supersonic jets might replace it, became one of the most important aircraft in history. It carried presidents, it carried pilgrims, it carried soldiers, it carried refugees, it carried rock stars, it carried families, it carried business people, it carried mail, it carried spacecraft, it carried the dreams of an age that believed bigger could mean better. And for a while, it did. The Boeing 747 was not just an airplane. It was a turning point. It changed who could fly. It changed how far people could go. It changed what airports looked like. It changed global trade. It changed tourism. It changed the meaning of distance. And it changed the emotional geography of the planet. A journey that once belonged to the wealthy, the patient, or the adventurous became something millions of people could do. Not because the world became smaller, but because one aircraft made humans feel larger. The next time you see the silhouette of a 747 with its raised nose and 4 engines, you are not just looking at an old airplane. You are looking at the machine that turned long-distance air travel into a mass human experience. You are looking at the ocean liner of the jet age, the cargo ship of the sky, the flying symbol of globalization, the queen of the skies, the jumbo jet that changed air travel forever.